Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Story Hub. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's hard to say exactly when things started feeling off. Looking back now, it all seems so obvious, but when you're in it, when it's your own life falling apart, sometimes it's like trying to see through fogged glass. Emily and I, we had 10 solid years together. I don't mean the perfect fairy tale stuff you read about. We fought over the usual things like bills and family gatherings, but we had our rhythm, or so I thought. When Emily landed her promotion, I was thrilled for her. She busted her ass to get it, the late nights, the work calls during dinner. I chalked it up to ambition, something she'd always had more of than me. The promotion meant a bigger paycheck, sure, but it also meant more travel. Suddenly, every couple of weeks, she was gone for a few nights, whisked off to God knows where for some critical team meeting or project launch. At first, it was just business as usual, but after a while, I noticed she started coming home, different. I couldn't put my finger on it, not right away, but she'd come back tired, way more than before, and with this strange kind of distance in her eyes, like she was somewhere else, even when she was sitting right across from me. Our conversations became shallow, like she was avoiding anything deeper, anything real. I'd ask her how her trip went, and she'd give me a 2-word answer before saying she was too wiped out to talk. I let it go, figuring work was taking more out of her than usual. But then my friend Mike noticed it too. We were out one night, just me, Mike, and a couple of guys, a typical guy's night, talking nonsense, tossing back a few beers. Out of nowhere, Mike goes, "Hey, is everything all right with you and Emily? I've noticed she's been kind of off." I laughed it off at first, didn't want to give it much thought, but Mike didn't let it go. "I mean it, man," he pressed. "At that company event last month, she barely said a word to anyone. And she used to be, you know, the life of the party." Hearing it from someone else hit different. I'd been telling myself she was just stressed, that the job was getting to her, but Mike saw it too. That's when this gnawing feeling started building inside me, like a splinter under my skin. I brushed it off, at least outwardly, but inside, I couldn't shake it. A few days after that, I decided to surprise her at work, thought maybe I'd take her out to lunch, remind her of the life she had waiting at home. I knew her schedule well enough, so I showed up around noon. Her secretary Paige was there, young, a bit too chirpy for a Monday morning. When she saw me, her face lit up with that look people get when they're happy to see the husband. She goes, "Oh, Mr. Ethan, she's already left for a meeting with a colleague." The way she said it was so casual, like it was nothing, but that one word, colleague, clanged in my head. I asked her which colleague, trying to keep my voice steady. Paige shrugged, said she didn't know, but that they'd left a while ago for some off-site meeting. I thanked her and left, but that whole drive home, my mind was spinning. Who was this colleague? Why hadn't she mentioned him or the meeting? And why was she so secretive about it? That night, I waited up for her. When she finally walked through the door, I could feel this anger bubbling up, but I kept it in check. She looked exhausted, barely glancing my way before trudging to the bedroom. I followed her, asking how her meeting went. She gave me this look, half surprised, half annoyed. "It was fine. Just work stuff," she muttered, brushing me off. I pressed a little more, trying to act casual, asking if she'd been out with anyone from her team. She hesitated a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. "Just Brandon," she said finally. "You remember Brandon, right? From my team." Now, I knew who Brandon was, a young, single, too good-looking guy who joined her team a few months back. Emily had mentioned him before, just in passing, saying he was good at his job and nice to work with. But seeing her mention him now, with that flicker of hesitation, made me question everything. I nodded, acting like it was nothing, but inside, every nerve was on edge. Days turned into weeks, and I started paying closer attention. Little things stood out. She'd get a message on her phone, and her expression would change. Sometimes a smile, sometimes a slight frown, but always something that felt private. If I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off, saying it was just work stuff. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but that feeling kept growing, clawing its way up, filling me with doubt. Then came another night out with Mike. We were at this pub, same as before, when he brought it up again. "Look, I don't mean to meddle," he started, clearly uneasy, "but I saw Emily with this guy at a work event last week. Looked like they were close." He glanced at me, probably expecting me to laugh it off or tell him he was seeing things, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at my beer, feeling the walls close in. "Did you notice anything?" I finally asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Mike shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I mean, she was talking to him a lot, that's all. I didn't see anything inappropriate if that's what you're asking. But the damage was done." I couldn't shake the image Mike had put in my head. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense, the long nights, the missed calls, the vague responses. It all pointed to something I didn't want to believe, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I couldn't keep it all in anymore. The thoughts were like a damn infection, eating at me from the inside out. Part of me wanted to just confront Emily head-on, let the words spill out. But then, what if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head, just some paranoid mess I'd created for myself? That's when Rebecca came to mind. Emily's younger sister had always been a bit of an outsider in the family, the opposite of her golden child sister. It's not like I was particularly close to her, but we got along well enough, and I knew one thing for sure, she'd never been Emily's biggest fan. Maybe she'd noticed something I hadn't, maybe she'd helped me see things clearly. So one evening, after stewing in my thoughts for too long, I gave her a call. Rebecca picked up after the second ring, and I heard her familiar, warm voice on the other end. "Ethan, everything okay?" "You know, I'm not even sure why I'm calling, Rebecca," I said, my voice feeling foreign even to my own ears. I feel like I need to talk to someone about Emily." There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone already knows where this is going. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th in about an hour," she finally replied, her tone softer, almost hesitant. I agreed, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness settle over me. Talking to Rebecca felt like a risk, but it was a risk I was more than willing to take. When I walked into the cafe, Rebecca was already seated by the window, swirling her coffee absent-mindedly. She looked up and gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "You look terrible, Ethan. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, settling into the chair across from her. "It's Emily. Things have been off for a while now. She's always tired, always distant, and there's this guy, Brandon." I stopped, not even sure how much to say. I hesitated. "I think she's hiding something." Rebecca's face tightened, her expression suddenly unreadable. "You think she's having an affair?" she whispered, leaning in closer. Her voice was careful, but there was something sharp in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. "Listen, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "You're not crazy. I mean, I've noticed it too. She's different lately, cold even. And you know, you're not the only one who's noticed." She looked away briefly, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen her at that cafe on 8th a few times. She goes there more than you'd think for someone who's supposedly too busy to call home." Her words felt like a punch to the gut, each one settling heavily on top of my doubts. "Do you think, could it really be Brandon?" I asked, half hoping she'd say no. But Rebecca just shook her head. "I don't know, but it sounds like he's involved somehow. I can keep an eye out if you want, see if anything unusual comes up." She was trying to be calm, but I could see a flash of something darker, something protective. Our conversation that day turned into an unexpected comfort. We didn't just talk about Emily, we ended up talking about a lot of things: life, people's disappointments, the stuff you don't get to talk about in polite company. Rebecca shared stories of her own struggles with relationships, the loneliness she often felt, especially being the black sheep of the family. Somehow, in the middle of my mess, we found common ground. Before we left, Rebecca touched my arm gently. "You know, Ethan, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." "Really?" There was a sincerity in her voice that felt strangely grounding. I nodded, managing a weak smile. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I'd thought. The following week, Rebecca and I met up again, both of us more prepared this time. We decided to try and catch Emily in her element, at that cafe on 8th. Rebecca had already been there a few times, trying to see if Emily's meetings lined up with her actual work schedule. Turns out, they didn't. That Tuesday, we sat near the back, hidden behind a wall of ferns and overly cheerful decor. Rebecca ordered coffee, but my mind was too jumbled to even think about food or drink. I kept my eyes glued to the door, nerves twisting my stomach. After half an hour, Emily walked in, and she wasn't alone. Brandon strolled in behind her, looking far too comfortable by her side. They picked a table near the window, and I felt this nauseating wave of anger and betrayal crash over me. Rebecca placed a hand on my arm, steadying me. "Wait," she whispered. "We don't want to blow this. Let's just see what they do." I nodded, forcing myself to stay still, to breathe. They ordered, chatted, laughed. Her hand brushed his arm every so often. The sight was like a slap to the face, every time she leaned in, every smile, every laugh. It was like seeing a stranger in my wife's skin. "I can't do this," I whispered, looking away, trying to keep the bile from rising. Rebecca squeezed my arm again. "Just a little longer, Ethan. We'll get the answers we need." After what felt like an eternity, Brandon left. I watched him go, wanting nothing more than to confront him, demand answers, but instead I stayed put, watching Emily sip her coffee with a relaxed smile, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Once she left, Rebecca turned to me, her face a mask of determination. "This isn't over, Ethan. We'll figure out exactly what's going on." Her words were a lifeline, keeping me grounded even as my world crumbled around me. As I drove home, the memory of Emily's laugh echoed in my mind, a taunting reminder of how little I knew her anymore. When I got back, she was already home, her expression unreadable as she greeted me, like she hadn't just been cozying up to Brandon that very afternoon. I didn't say a word, didn't bring it up. Instead, I let the resentment build, festering under the surface, waiting for the moment to crack it wide open. And Rebecca was there every step of the way, her loyalty and strength becoming a strange source of comfort I never thought I'd need. After that day in the cafe, it was like the final piece of my faith in Emily crumbled. There was no denying what I saw, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not without something concrete. I wanted proof, hard evidence, not just a hunch or a few shady coffee dates with Brandon. If she was going to destroy everything we'd built together, she wouldn't do it with half-truths and excuses. Rebecca and I came up with a plan. She mentioned an upcoming corporate event Emily had talked about, some big gala or awards night. I don't remember exactly what, but I did remember that Emily had specifically told me I couldn't come. "It's just for employees," she'd said, a casual throwaway excuse that grated on my nerves. I nodded like a good husband, pretending I didn't care, but now Rebecca and I saw it for what it was, an opportunity. The night of the event, Rebecca and I arrived early. We parked a good distance away from the venue, keeping ourselves out of sight. I felt ridiculous, like some third-rate detective in a bad movie, but desperation does strange things to a person. I hadn't told anyone else what was going on, this mission was just between me and Rebecca. Even Mike, who'd started this whole mess by pointing out Emily's strange behavior, had no clue what I was up to now. We slipped in through a side entrance Rebecca had scoped out earlier. She'd managed to snag us a couple of guest passes, and we kept a low profile, sticking to the edges of the crowd. Emily was easy to spot. She wore a deep green dress, one I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly done, laughing and mingling with her colleagues like nothing was amiss. And then I saw him, Brandon. The way they moved around each other was subtle, almost practiced. They'd keep their distance, then drift closer, as if pulled by some invisible string. At one point, I saw him lean in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh, a laugh I hadn't heard in months. "Stay calm, Ethan," Rebecca whispered, sensing the tension coiled inside me. I took a shaky breath, keeping my eyes fixed on them. "I just need to know," I muttered, more to myself than to her. We stayed back, watching their every move, waiting for the moment they'd slip away. And then, as if on cue, Emily and Brandon exchanged a glance, one that said more than words ever could. They walked out of the main hall, heading down a dimly lit corridor toward a private area of the venue. "Follow me," Rebecca whispered, taking the lead. We crept after them, keeping enough distance to stay hidden but close enough to catch every detail. They disappeared through a door at the end of the corridor, closing it softly behind them. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Rebecca gently grabbed my arm. "Wait here. I'll go take a look." Before I could argue, she slipped forward, moving with a confidence I didn't know she had. I waited in that dark corridor, feeling every second stretch into eternity. Finally, she came back, her face pale but resolved. "It's them. They're together." That was it, the truth, stark and ugly. Part of me felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet, and yet there was also a strange sense of relief. The doubts were gone, replaced by cold, hard certainty. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't all in my head. "I can't believe it," I muttered, feeling more numb than anything. But Rebecca wasn't done. "There's something else," she said, glancing back toward the hall. "She's not just involved with Brandon. I think there's someone else trying to get her attention." I blinked at her, not quite processing. "Who?" "A guy named Brett, younger. Works in her department. I saw him trying to cozy up to her earlier." She laughed him off, but it was. "I don't know, Ethan, I think she's enjoying all of this, the attention, the flirting." That realization was like a slap to the face. The woman I thought I knew, the one I trusted with every part of me, was now treating our marriage like a casual game. Just the idea of it made me sick. After that night, I knew I needed more than just Rebecca's observations. I needed irrefutable proof. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Andrew, who came highly recommended. I met him at a quiet bar a few days later, feeling like I was signing my life away with every word. Andrew didn't ask for any explanations, he'd heard it all before. He gave me a hard, assessing look before handing me his business card. "You'll have what you need soon enough," he said, his voice all business. Over the next few weeks, Andrew provided me with more than I bargained for: pictures of Emily with Brandon, receipts from hotels, dinner bills. Every little detail was laid out in black and white, a brutal reminder of just how far things had gone. One night, as I sifted through the evidence in my kitchen, Rebecca stopped by to check on me. She sat down across from me, glancing at the photos and receipts spread across the table. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Honestly? I don't know." I looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something there, a warmth and understanding I hadn't realized I'd missed. "It's all so messed up." She nodded, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "I know, Ethan, but you're not alone in this. You've got people who care about you." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. In that moment, Rebecca wasn't just Emily's sister, she was someone who understood my pain, someone who'd seen the best and worst of me without judgment. We sat there in silence for a while, just existing in the same space, sharing the weight of everything we'd discovered. Rebecca was my anchor, keeping me from drifting into a place I wasn't sure I could come back from. And somehow, despite the betrayal and heartache, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The more I dug into Emily's betrayal, the more the hurt twisted into something heavier, more toxic. I kept asking myself how she could do this, how someone I thought I knew could lie, manipulate, and betray me in ways I hadn't even imagined. But the evidence was undeniable. No matter how many nights I spent staring at the photos, receipts, and hotel bills, it didn't change the fact that she had wrecked the life we'd built together. In those quiet, heavy moments, Rebecca was my only refuge. She was the one person who didn't just know about Emily's affair, she felt its impact just as deeply. Maybe it was because she knew Emily better than anyone, or maybe it was because she, too, had been sidelined and overlooked in ways that left their own scars. Whatever it was, we shared a connection I hadn't expected, a lifeline I desperately clung to as my world unraveled. One night, Rebecca came over with a bottle of bourbon, the kind of strong, cheap stuff that goes straight to your bones. She sat across from me in the dim light of the living room, the table between us covered in papers and photos, a crime scene laid out in black and white. "Are you sure you want to keep these?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She gestured to the pile of evidence Andrew had compiled. "I mean, you've already got more proof than you need." I shrugged, taking another swig. "I don't know, Rebecca. I guess I just can't believe it's real." She nodded, her eyes softening in that way that seemed to cut through my anger, hitting me right where the sadness lived. "Yeah, I get that." She reached out, placing her hand over mine, her touch warm and steady, a grounding force I didn't realize I needed. We talked that night, not just about Emily but about our lives, our frustrations, our disappointments. I opened up in ways I hadn't allowed myself to with anyone else, sharing things I'd locked away for years. Rebecca listened, never judging, her presence a quiet reassurance that maybe I wasn't as alone in this mess as I felt. And then, there was this moment. A silence hung between us, thick with everything left unsaid. I glanced down at her hand on mine, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a warmth, an attraction I tried to push away, but it stayed, lingering, tempting. "Rebecca," I whispered, not sure what I wanted to say or if I should even be saying anything at all. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Ethan." She stopped, her voice catching. For a moment, I thought she'd pull away, that we'd leave it at that, a line not to be crossed. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned closer, her hand still resting on mine, her breath warm against my skin, and before I knew it, we crossed that line. A boundary we both knew we shouldn't cross, but did anyway. What started as a gesture of comfort turned into something more, something that was both a betrayal and a release. In that moment, all the anger, the betrayal, the hurt, none of it mattered. For the first time in months, I felt something real, something honest. When it was over, we sat there, neither of us saying a word. I expected regret, shame, anything that would remind me of the life I was leaving behind. But instead, there was only a quiet acceptance, a strange sense of peace in the chaos. Rebecca looked at me, her gaze steady, her expression soft but serious. It doesn't have to mean anything," she murmured, almost as if she were talking to herself as much as to me. "Maybe it's just the hurt, the anger." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what it meant, or if it even mattered. All I knew was that for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, understood in a way that went beyond words. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on the task at hand. I met with Andrew again, going over the latest batch of evidence, preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation with Emily. Every time I thought about it, I felt the anger rise, a bitterness that tasted like ash. But then I'd think of Rebecca, of that night we shared, and somehow it made the whole thing a little more bearable. A week later, Rebecca and I met up again. We sat in my kitchen, a stack of papers and photos between us, going over the evidence one last time. It was strange, surreal, like we were planning a takedown, a coup against the woman who had wronged us both. But there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding that went beyond Emily, beyond revenge. It was just us. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes filled with something softer, a hint of worry. I looked at her, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. "Honestly? I don't know. But it's time, Rebecca. I can't keep living like this." She nodded, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "I'm here, Ethan. Whatever you need." Those words, simple as they were, hit me harder than anything else. Rebecca was there through the worst of it, through the moments of doubt and anger and confusion. She was there when I had no one else to turn to, when the life I thought I knew crumbled at my feet. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I'd spent months living in the shadows, piecing together a betrayal I never saw coming, clinging to the anger and hurt like a lifeline. But now it was time to confront it, to lay everything bare and let the chips fall where they may. Before I left, I sent Rebecca a text, a simple message: "Thank you for everything." I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. Remember that." Her words stayed with me as I drove, a reminder of the connection we'd forged in the ashes of our shared pain. Whatever happened next, whatever came out of that confrontation with Emily, I knew one thing for sure: Rebecca would be there, a constant in the storm, a reminder of what it meant to be truly seen. I knew it was time to face her. I had all the proof, all the damning pieces lined up neatly, as if that could somehow make the pain feel organized, controlled. But nothing about this was controlled. My life, our marriage, it was shattered, a chaos I could barely hold in my hands. The day Emily came back from her latest business trip, I was ready. I waited for her in the living room, the evidence spread out on the coffee table like some twisted display, a testament to every lie she'd ever told me. She walked in, her face bright with some story she'd probably rehearsed, not knowing her excuses would mean nothing this time. When she saw me sitting there, saw the papers, the photos, the receipts, her face fell. What is all this, Ethan?" she stammered, her eyes darting over the table, lingering on the hotel receipts and the pictures of her and Brandon that Andrew had collected. "It's everything you thought you could hide from me, Emily," I said, my voice as cold and controlled as I could manage. "Every lie, every single time you looked me in the eyes and fed me some crap about late meetings and business trips." I shook my head, anger flaring. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face, but she tried to play it off, taking a deep breath and squaring her shoulders. "Ethan, you're misunderstanding. This is not what you think." "Really?" I leaned forward, barely able to keep the fury in check. "So what am I misunderstanding here, Emily?" "The photos, the hotel bookings, the texts." I threw her phone at her feet, already unlocked to reveal a chain of messages she'd sent to Brandon. I'd read enough of them to know the truth, each word a punch to the gut. She bent down, picked up the phone, staring at the screen as if seeing it for the first time. "You went through my phone. That's what you're focusing on?" I laughed bitterly, feeling the anger morph into something darker, a disgust I could barely contain. "You're a piece of work, you know that. After all this, all the years I trusted you, you turn this around and try to play the victim?" She flinched, her face crumpling for just a second before she caught herself. "You don't understand, Ethan," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "You haven't exactly been there for me lately. You've been distant, cold. I was alone, and Brandon, he was there." That hit a nerve. I stood up, barely holding back. "Don't you dare pin this on me. I wasn't the one sneaking around, lying to your face. You made the choice, Emily. You chose to step out, to betray everything we built together. My voice cracked, and I hated that I still felt that raw hurt, that she still had that power over me. She threw her hands up, as if she were the one wronged. And what about you, huh? You're not so innocent either. I know about you and Rebecca. The accusation hung in the air, a bitter, poisonous thing. I blinked, caught off guard, but only for a second. I straightened, meeting her gaze with cold certainty. Yeah. I'm not denying it. But don't twist this, Emily. This is about you. What Rebecca and I have, whatever it is, that came after. After you threw away our marriage for some cheap fling. She scoffed, her expression twisting with contempt. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you haven't changed at all. Like you didn't just check out of our life without a word. I checked out because you pushed me out. The words erupted louder than I'd intended, my voice breaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I tried, Emily. For years, I tried. But you turned into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could lie to me every damn day and not feel a thing. And all this time, you were with him, laughing at me behind my back, making a fool out of me. She fell silent, her defiance cracking, something sad and defeated slipping through. Ethan. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. For the first time, I saw it, a flicker of remorse, or maybe it was just the weight of getting caught. At that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. The silence between us stretched, the broken pieces of our marriage lying like shattered glass around us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, forcing the final words out, the ones I knew I needed to say to free myself from this nightmare. It's over, Emily. There's nothing left to save. I'm done. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock, and maybe a bit of fear. You don't mean that. Yes, I do, I replied, my voice hollow but firm. I deserve better than this. Better than you. For a long moment, we just stood there, two strangers who once shared a life, now separated by the bitter truth. She didn't say another word, didn't try to defend herself or beg for forgiveness. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of our shattered promises. After she left, I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling the anger drain away, replaced by a strange hollow emptiness. I was free, but at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to face. My marriage, my life, it all felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another person. A few hours later, Rebecca came over. I hadn't told her what happened, but she took one look at me and knew. She pulled me into a hug, no words, just the steady warmth of her presence. And for the first time, I felt something break inside me, a wall I'd been holding up for too long. I pulled back, looking into her eyes, feeling something stronger, more real than anything I'd felt with Emily in years. Thank you, Rebecca, for everything. She gave me a small, sad smile, her hand reaching up to touch my cheek. You don't have to thank me, Ethan. I'm just here. I didn't know what the future held, I didn't know if Rebecca and I could build something out of the ashes of our broken lives. But in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope, a small piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't alone. The days after that confrontation with Emily felt like an open wound. The anger had faded, leaving a raw emptiness, a strange stillness in the life we'd once shared. She moved out that night, no dramatic goodbyes, just a few mumbled words about needing space. I didn't argue, there was nothing left to say, no words that could undo the damage. I just watched her leave, feeling the weight of a life now divided. In those early days, Rebecca was there for me in a way I didn't expect. She stayed close, keeping me grounded through the worst of it. There were nights when she'd come over, and we'd just sit together in silence, not needing words. She had this way of making the loneliness feel a little less sharp, a little less like a constant reminder of what I'd lost. One evening, she showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a crooked smile. "Thought you could use some company," she said, her voice gentle but steady. I let her in, grateful for the comfort her presence brought. We settled in on the couch, the silence between us easy, familiar. As we drank, the conversation turned to memories of our shared past, childhood moments that had almost faded, buried under years of life and loss. We laughed, reminisced, filling the space with stories that reminded me of a simpler time, a time before betrayal and heartbreak. At one point, she turned to me, her eyes soft, almost hesitant. "You know, I never thought we'd end up here, like this." I nodded, a bittersweet smile crossing my face. "Me neither. But maybe it's not such a bad thing." I paused, searching for the right words. "You've been here for me, Rebecca, in ways I didn't even know I needed. And well, I just don't know what I'd have done without you." Her gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand covering mine. "You don't have to do this alone, Ethan. Whatever you need, I'm here." In that moment, I felt a quiet certainty, a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't about rushing into anything new, it was about allowing myself to heal, to feel something other than anger and hurt. Rebecca and I hadn't planned any of this, hadn't expected the closeness that had grown between us. But life has a way of surprising you, of finding beauty in the most broken places. Over the next few months, we took things slow, letting our relationship grow naturally, without the weight of expectations. Rebecca was patient, understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. She knew the hurt I carried, the scars Emily had left behind, and somehow, she managed to give me space while staying close enough to be there when I needed her. One weekend, we took a trip to a cabin she'd rented up north. It was a small, quiet place by the lake, surrounded by towering trees and the gentle sounds of nature. We spent the days hiking, talking about our dreams, our fears, all the things we'd kept hidden for too long. It felt like a fresh start, a way to let go of the past and look forward to something new. One morning, as the sun rose over the lake, painting the water in shades of orange and pink, Rebecca turned to me, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "I never thought I'd find happiness here, with you, after everything that happened, but I don't know. This feels right." I looked at her, feeling that same sense of peace settle over me. "It does, doesn't it?" I agreed, pulling her close, my heart steady for the first time in months. Maybe this is exactly where we were meant to end up. Over time, my friends noticed the change. Mike was the first to mention it one night as we sat around a fire in his backyard, the familiar warmth of friendship easing the scars I'd carried for so long. "You look happier, man," he said, nudging me with a grin. "Guess things worked out with Rebecca, huh?" I nodded, a genuine smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah. She's something else." The guys exchanged knowing looks, offering quiet words of support that I hadn't known I needed. For the first time in ages, I felt whole, like I was finally moving forward instead of looking back at the pieces of a life that no longer fit. And then came the hardest part, filing for divorce. It wasn't about revenge or anger anymore, it was about closure, about letting go of something that had once meant everything to me but had since turned into a reminder of betrayal. I went through the motions, signing the papers, attending the meetings, feeling that final weight lift as I closed the chapter on Emily. When the divorce was finalized, Rebecca was there, waiting for me outside the courthouse. She didn't say a word, just wrapped me in a hug, her arms warm and steady, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe, like the weight of the past had lifted, leaving room for something new. We stood there in that quiet, unassuming moment, feeling the relief settle over us. Rebecca pulled back, her gaze meeting mine, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "So, what now?" I took a deep breath, feeling a newfound sense of freedom, a fresh start just within reach. Now we make a life for ourselves. A real one. Built on honesty, built on us. From that point on, Rebecca and I focused on the future, letting the scars of the past heal in their own time. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was real, and it was ours. We faced the tough days, the moments of doubt, together, building a bond that felt deeper, more honest than anything I'd known before. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our new place, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rebecca reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Ethan, I know this journey has been a mess, and it's taken us places we never thought we'd go, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." I looked at her, feeling the truth of her words resonate within me. Neither would I. I never thought I'd find you. But here we are. And with that, I let the past fade, knowing that I'd found something stronger, more resilient, in the arms of someone who'd been there all along. Life had thrown us together in the most unexpected way, but sometimes the most broken paths lead to the places we're meant to be. As the night settled around us, I knew that whatever came next, Rebecca and I would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to let go, to build a future from the ashes, knowing that this new beginning was finally, truly mine.